Welcome to 304 Customs Garage. In this episode, I'm going to cover the topic of making your power brake system work with Hedman Fenderwell headers on a small block Chevy S10 with Vortec heads. Now, in this video, I plan to cover why we're doing this, where we need to move everything, and then I'll also show you which parts I'm planning to use to make this work. We have a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. Power brakes, Fenderwell headers, small block Chevy with Vortec heads. Everything factory should have worked. However, I ran into an issue. The headers with the ABS little module thing or whatever that was, and the portion valve was way too close to this primary tube on the headers. So we're going to have to move that. And we're going to move the portion valve over. Of course, I already got rid of all the ABS stuff. We're not going to use any of that. My plan for this is to relocate the portion valve over in this area somewhere, and then run the brake lines back to the firewall, up over the brake booster, and down between the washer pump and the valve cover. Back there's a nice little area with not a lot of stuff in it back here. That should be a good place for it. I believe a lot of others have probably done that, and I've seen some pictures on a Facebook group, and that's a lot of people ran them through there and down the firewall away from the header heat. Of course, I'm going to get these headers coated once I get the exhaust part of it worked on. That'll be in a later video. We'll go cover that topic. But I believe we should be able to avoid going to manual brakes right away, at least with this setup. However, I am going to have to run a vacuum pump because the cam that's in this motor is not very vacuum friendly. So we're going to have bad brakes if we don't. So we'll touch on that in another video as well. But for now, we're over here and we'll start working on getting these lines hooked up to the portion valve. So I have the old portion valve in the vise here. I believe this goes to the brake light and the dash. This little sensor plug, whatever that is. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, we're going to make new brake lines, and we're going to reuse the old fittings because the fittings that I thought would fit in here, and from what I was reading, unless I read it wrong, were not the correct ones. So we're going to reuse the factory fittings with new brake line. And we're going to double flare everything. And the brake line that we're going to be using is the stuff I picked up from Jegs. Nothing fancy. Nickel copper brake line. This is really easy to bend. Doesn't look as nice as stainless steel, but it's also not as hard to work with. And I don't do a lot of brakes, so I don't have a lot of brake stuff, but I have enough to make this job work. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll go ahead and pop the fittings off the old brake line, which was about here. Put these fittings on, and then we'll get that over there and do some test fitting, and then we'll go ahead and check this one as well, and I'll show you the brake line size for that. Okay, so we got the old fitting off the master cylinder side, and I went ahead and put that on the piece. I don't know what size this is, but for the piece that goes into the portion valve, I did have some fittings of those that I acquired from Jegs as well. These are the ones that will go on there. If anyone wants that, it's 635810. Inverted flare steel tube nut for 3/16 inch outside diameter nickel copper tubing. Fitting size is 3/8 by 24. 3/8-24 for the thread pitch. There it is. So we'll put one of these on the other end before we get cutting anything, and then it'll already be on there when we flare it, and we can just move it up and bend it after it's already on the truck. Stuff's really easy to bend. You could literally sit there and twirl it around your fingers with a little bit of pressure. So we'll go ahead and get that on, and then we'll go ahead and start figuring out about where we need to mount that. Okay, so I got the 3/16 line put on the portion valve and master cylinder. Now we're going to go ahead and do the 1/4 inch line. That line, I'm using the same thing I got it from Jegs. It's a nickel copper brake line, 1/4 inch. And there you go. Nickel copper brake line, 1/4 inch. 635832 is the part number for this. Just a 20-inch piece. It is double flared. 45 degrees. And we're going to cut the piece off the end off of here. I'm going to use the factory fitting that goes into the master cylinder. Again, I don't know what size that is exactly, but it's bigger than these pieces. And then this one will go into the proportion valve, inverted flare, steel tube nut, 1/4 inch line, 7/16-24 thread pitch. 635812 is the part number for these. So we'll get that wrapped up here, and then we'll be back and I'll show you what it looks like so far. So I got my portion valve back on the master cylinder. Again, we just 3/16 line's the smaller one, 1/4 inch the bigger one, 7/16-24 fitting to go into the portion valve, and that one is 3/8-24 on the threads. So now what I'm going to do is route the brake lines from underneath to the brake line going from the rear and down to the T-fitting underneath the truck for the wheels. And once I get that wrapped up, I'll show you the path that I took. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, so I finally got the brake lines ran. We got 1/4 inch to the rear brakes. I went up around the brake booster and then down to there. And we get down here, tied in right there. And then we have the 3/16 line to the T there, down there for the front wheels. Ran it over to the frame mount. And then over here, it's actually a little, you probably can't see that, but it's a little behind the cylinder head there. So it's right out of the way. I tested the headers before I popped them off. Well, I had to take them off to get those little line clamps on there, but I put them back on there briefly. Doesn't touch anything. It's enough clearance there. Same route for that. Run it up through there, over, and then down, clamps, and then I tied it in to the portion valve. It should work. Hopefully we can keep the power brakes with us. My real question for this is the portion valve going to work? Because I'm putting a disc brake rear end on the back. The stock rear end in this truck is actually drums. So we'll see about that when we get there. That'll be in a future video, I'm sure. Next video, hopefully we're going to touch base a little bit on putting those headers back on here, and then we're actually going to be swapping the transmission cross member for an aftermarket one for the exhaust routing. I'm not going to do the exhaust yet, but it's going to help get the transmission where I need it, so then we can jump to the rear. That'll be up next. If you have any questions about what we used in here, please leave it in the comments. Appreciate everyone watching. Thank you for the support, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Have a good night.